prog rock. The punks and mods hated it. The critics ripped it apart, and often still do. And the metalheads built upon it, turned it into something completely different. But as the psychedelic 60s gave way to the high-tech 70s and art school students put their heads together with music theory and humanities majors, the boundaries of rock stretched way beyond the breaking point. Plus, the locus of music moved from the dance floor and the stage to the recording studio. The relatively highbrow worlds of fashion, literature, formal musical training, and concept art met the relatively lowbrow world of electric guitar, bass, drums, and keyboards, and an entirely new way of performing popular music was born.
Carry on my wayward son, there'll be peace when you are done. Lay your weary head to rest, don't you cry no more.
Hello, I'm John J. Thompson, and if you've been with us for any length of time on the True Tunes podcast, you've hopefully caught on to the fact that we are truly interested in a wide range of musical genres and eras around here. We've talked about Americana music, Jesus music, psychedelic rock, gospel, rap, apocalyptic folk, and more. The key, I believe, to understanding diverse styles, though, to really getting to the good stuff, is to talk to true experts about these things. Who better to talk to about Americana music than Buddy Miller, for instance? And since we started this show, I have wanted to have an episode devoted to the mind-blowing, dexterous, diverse, but often maligned and misunderstood world of progressive rock. So, to do that, we have tracked down one of the most respected prog rock artists in the world, Mr. Neal Morse. He of Spock's Beard, Transatlantic, Flying Colors, and his own bands, to hear about the genre in general and his incredible story in particular. It took us a while, but thanks to our friend and prog rock translator Mark Hollingsworth, a conversation finally happened at Neal's impressive home studio and label headquarters north of Nashville. Prog rock, also referred to as art rock or symphonic rock, was born in the mid-60s, came into full flower in the early 70s, and then hit the top 40 with hits by Kansas, Styx, and Genesis, before falling out of favor with the mainstream as punk, disco, new wave, and hard rock took over. It never died, though. A devoted remnant of fans has remained committed to the intricately crafted conceptual sounds and lofty ideas arranged prodigiously by musical wizards. On this episode, with the help of one of the genre's most accomplished and respected practitioners, we will attempt to pull the veil back a bit, to climb the misty mountain of prog, to see what makes this music so compelling to so many despite its relative commercial obscurity, critical dispassion, and seeming cultural unhipness. In the process, we will examine the amazing story of that one musician, an uber-talented songwriter, guitarist, and keyboard player who spent the 80s pursuing rock and roll glory in Los Angeles, only to find himself frustrated, depressed, and on the verge of giving up when a surprise turn saved his musical and even spiritual life. The adventure commences right after we take care of a little bit of housekeeping.
Hello, I'm Chris, and I'm a Patreon supporter of the True Tunes podcast, which has quickly become one of my favorite podcasts. I can always expect John's warm voice and insightful questions to draw out the stories, wisdom, and faith of beloved and new to me musical artists. After every episode, I'm always listening with fresh ears to favorite albums or visiting new albums for the first time. It's just like when I used to visit the old True Tunes store in Wheaton, Illinois, but now I can visit every week with new episodes. True Tunes Patreon supporters support the show with monthly donations of $5, $10, or $20, which helps to cover the cost of producing and hosting the show. As a thanks for our support, we get early access to episodes and high-quality, lossless WAV files of each episode that we can download. We also have occasional Zoom meetups, some special live streams, discounts on True Tunes swag, and more. You can join me and the other patrons by visiting patreon.com/TrueTunes or finding the link on the show notes page. If an ongoing patronage thing is not the right fit for you, but you'd like to give us a tip to help with the costs associated with this show, you can find links for that on the show notes page. Thanks, and enjoy.
Hey, this is Ray, and I just left a rating and review at Apple Podcasts, because I know how important that is, as this show grows and reaches more people. Would you please take a few minutes to do the same? It's easy. And even if you don't listen on Apple, the reviews there show up on lots of other apps and sites. Thanks a lot.
If you're not familiar with Neal Morse, you're probably not a fan of modern prog rock, and that's okay. I'm actually thrilled to have you listening. Whether you ever enjoy this music or not, I think you'll find his story fascinating. Fans of the genre will know him from the bands he has formed and helmed, Spock's Beard, Flying Colors, Transatlantic, and his own Neal Morse Band among them. It might help you to know that rock legends like John Anderson of Yes and Kerry Livgren of Kansas are fans. Many prog fans will have heard of his proprietary festival, Morsefest, or have heard his name pop up as a collaborator with any number of A-listers in the scene. But if this is all new to you, rest assured we're in good hands. I first met Neal when he performed an amazing late-night set at the final Cornerstone Festival in 2012. After what may have been the longest and most complicated soundcheck in the history of the gallery stage, I was thrilled to introduce him to an enraptured audience. And since Neal has so much music of his own, we're not going to have a standard jukebox feature on this episode. Instead, Bruce has loaded the jukebox up with songs from many of his different projects and entities and is going to let them spill out all over the show. But for now, let's head into the studio with Neal Morse. Neal, thank you for joining the True Tunes podcast and being with us today. Thanks for letting me come here to your lair north of Nashville, where all the magic happens.
Yeah.
Been wanting to dive in and kind of grab this tiger by the tail and learn some more about progressive rock, and there's just nobody I think could probably teach us. And you've got quite a story, so I'm excited to hear about it.
Well, thank you. Good to be with you.
Tell me about your earliest memories of music as a kid. What grabbed your attention and first got its hooks in you and said, yeah, this is a path you're going to follow for real?
Well, my dad was a music teacher. So the first music I remember would be choral music. He was a choir director. So he would teach us madrigals.
Oh, yeah. I was in madrigals.
Yeah.
I wore the tights and everything.
I wore the tights, too. At the Renaissance Fair.
Yeah, that's right.
We ran out of gas on the way home. My dad, somebody had self-made one of the moms made our outfits.
Same here.
And they were it was like a yellow smock with pantyhose. It was horrible. This is in Topanga Canyon in California, one of the canyons, Laurel Canyon.
Yeah.
No, it would be Topanga or further out where they used to have the Renaissance Fair. So we run out of gas in a station wagon, 1968 or something. And Dad gets out. He has to hitchhike, and he looks like a giant Tweety bird.
That's good.
Somebody gave him a ride. Hippies would pick up anybody, I guess.
So maybe he was dressed perfectly for that day.
But yeah, so we sang madrigals, and so I learned to sing, stuff that had some intricacy to it when I was little, and really enjoyed that. The biggest thing for me in popular music would have been the Beatles, of course. I was 4 years old when they played on Ed Sullivan. I vaguely remember it, but it was just like, oh yeah, just like the whole rest of the world. That's what I want to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
Close your eyes and I'll kiss you. Tomorrow I'll miss you. Remember, I'll always miss you. And then while I'm away, I'll ride home every day, and I'll send all my loving to you.
Do you remember when you first were like, I'm going to write songs and learn how to play an instrument?
Well, the writing song, of course, I'm 4 years old then in 1964. So, no, the creating came when I was more like 11 and 12. I started playing piano. They put me in piano lessons at 5. But I didn't really, and I knew I wanted to be involved in music in some way, but I didn't start writing till I was really 12 years old. And then the big thing for me was I saw Yes open for Black Sabbath at the LA Forum. My brothers were older. You might be wondering, what's this kid going to go see Black Sabbath at 12 years old? That's a little unusual. Well,
And they were a little different early on than they got later. Like, they weren't.
Oh, no, they were horrible.
Okay.
No. I love some of the Sabbath stuff. I loved it then. I mean, I love the power of rock.
Right.
And then, anyway, Yes opened up. I'd never heard of them. Mm-hmm. And that was a real light bulb moment because, and that's the thing about progressive rock, is it's so multifaceted. It's not just one part of music. A lot of times people only want to listen to one style of music at a time. But I grew up, my dad's choral programs were very eclectic.
Yeah.
I don't know what the plural of eclectic is, but it seemed to me the musical world at that time, I mean, if you listen to the Woodstock album, there's a lot of eclecticism in there, or whatever the word would be. Yeah. And so that was sort of normal. In fact, it was thought to be sort of boring to me when I was growing up if you were just going to do one style. It'd be like a contemporary song, a classical song, a Japanese song, a Negro spiritual. That was the way a madrigal. And that was the way I was kind of raised up. So when I saw Yes, and they had rock music with pop vocals, I would say, a lot of harmony, and then classical piano, classical elements, jazz elements. I was like, wow, you can do this? You can do it, have it all in one. And it was all the things that I loved, classical guitar, and all the vocal harmony. I loved all the vocal harmony of the Beatles, and then later on Crosby, Stills and Nash, and Yes really encompassed all of those things.
Do you think the Beatles even kind of set the stage a little bit for the progressive rock with what they were doing? Revolver heading into White Album, Sgt. Pepper. It seemed like them and Beach Boys were already, to my ears, and I'm 10 years behind you at that point. So I was listening to that stuff over the last 20 years and going, man, it really feels like they were kind of proto-prog. Like they were pushing the boundaries and trying to pull 3 genres into one song or create suites of things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Everybody was on the same ship, really. I think the Beatles said that. We were all on the same ship. Maybe we were just a little further forward. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, if you listen to... I'll say to my wife all the time, we'll listen to the radio, prog. That's prog influence in some total pop song.
Right.
From the time, suddenly they'll just edit and go into some other part and then go back. They didn't do that before. Right. People were exploring, and I think it became to the point where if you weren't exploring very much,
you just weren't trying.
It was. I think it was boring for people for a period of time.
Kind of went down the country path for a bit as a writer and artist as well, right?
I did. That's skipping very far ahead.
Oh, okay.
No. In the early 90s, I was dating a girl who was a country singer in L.A. And she asked me to write some songs for her. And at that time, country was just starting to be a little more pop-ish. And so I listened to the songs that she was singing, and then I tried to write stuff that was sort of like that.
Okay, but that was long after you had been on this other musical.
Oh yeah, I went through a ton of musical journeys.
Yeah.
You know, I was in a band that was kind of like a Styx Journey band in the 80s. I was in a new wave kind of band with Haircut 100. I was I had the new wave haircut. I was trying to make it.
Yeah.
You
were in LA?
I was in LA, yeah. And then really the thing I spent most of my time on was trying to get a deal as a singer-songwriter, sort of a Billy Joel type. But then in the 80s, that wasn't as popular. So then there were certain people, and later came people like Mark Cohn and Bruce Hornsby. And so I was trying to do stuff that sounded a little hipper. Like their stuff sounded a little hipper. But that was my thing, was to, in my 20s anyway, was to be a singer-songwriter. I didn't start writing prog till I was in my 30s.
Aside from your career path or what you were hoping to accomplish professionally, what were you doing just as a musician in terms of composing, practicing, woodshedding? What was making you excited just as a personal artist?
In those days?
Yeah. How does that path look like for you?
It's not that different than now.
Okay, that's why.
Just getting up in the morning and sitting down at the piano and, seeing what comes out, hearing things, and, so I've woken up a lot of my life with melodies in my mind, and trying to sort them out and see what they should be and putting words to them, and that was my religion before I became religious.
Was there sort of a seeking something deeper in the music? Were you trying to find something spiritual in it? Did you feel that there was something essentially spiritual about music in that, or were you just...
I think I did. Later on, in the latter half of my 20s particularly, I just had so many experiences that were beyond me. What I mean is, there were times when I felt like I heard whole pieces of music just playing in my head. And I just felt like it wasn't from me. And so I began to pray to the universe. The people that I was around in LA and the things that I was doing, there were a lot of people that were... So they would say things like, put it out there in the universe, which is kind of their way of saying, pray about it. Seek the Lord about it, we would say. Right. I would say now, but at that time. And I remember very clearly, this is part of my history. I was standing out in front of my house there in California. And I was kind of saying, like, oh, universe, make this piece that, I started writing musicals, I think, in my late 20s. And, I always wanted to do something grand. I suppose most musicians do. Right. And so I was praying about whatever it was, whatever piece it was. Oh, universe, would you make this, live in people's hearts and make this, something that is really successful. And I remember very clearly this voice from inside booming in my chest, almost like, will you knock it off and call me God?
Wow, man.
And so I went, okay. And so I started to use the word God after that. I was probably 28, I guess.
where no one knows the bad things that you've done. The past is truly gone in the land of beginning again. And I love my brother more than my own life, and no one feels me. All things are new, behold, the slate is clean. I wish there was a way to start again. Just blink and count to 10 in the land of beginning again. In the land of beginning again.
But music was like, and this was the problem actually. Music was my God, and so I was looking for music to supply happiness, fulfillment, provision. You know, I was supposed to make it and have enough, right? And somehow music was supposed to fulfill me. And when I discovered that it was never enough, was in my early 30s, and I kind of just, and coupled with the fact that I hadn't gotten the record deal, the pot of gold that I was looking for. I hadn't gotten the acceptance that I thought I deserved. I felt very angry. I became a very angry, bitter person at like 31. Mm. And I have to say this because it's such an important thing that happened. Then I did this course. I was trying to do anything that I could do to get myself out of this depression and hole that I was in, because I didn't really want to write anymore. I still wrote because it was just in me, but it was all just really, as you can imagine, very depressing, sad stuff. Some of which was good. I wound up recording some of it later on, but I did this self-growth course called the Landmark Forum, and I did the first one and was like, and then I did the advanced course, and I won't go into too much detail about it, but what I saw in the course was that I had collapsed how I felt about the music business with music itself.
Wow, yeah.
Like it was one domain.
Right. Like
one circle.
Right. Called music, and it was filled with all kinds of resentment and bitterness and death. Mm-hmm. And through the things that they said, I saw that they weren't the same thing. Mm-hmm. Right. And my story about the music business, when I separated it out from music itself, I had an awakening, and I was like, I always think of Monty Python. I never wanted to be an accountant. I wanted to be a lumberjack, right? I never wanted to be a brooding artist. Right. I didn't want to I wanted to write big pieces of music. Right. I wanted to write stuff like West Side Story and Close to the Edge, and and so right out of that course, I wrote what was the first Spock's Beard album. Wow. Yeah, I just had this I'm going to write stuff that nobody will like. Everyone will hate it. I never wanted to just do stuff that I hated. What's the point of that? Right. Although I did sometimes, but even that stuff wasn't accepted. Right. I couldn't even sell out. Yeah. I really suck. I can't even suck.
Right.
I suck so bad.
I worked really hard at getting advertising gigs, and then the campaigns would fall through. I'm like, gosh. But yeah, when I really, it's such a wonderful and somehow obvious thing, isn't it? That when you give up trying to be successful, then you have the first success that you would ever have.
Open up the floodgates in your mind that you might be set free. Open up the windows left behind and stand in what could be. When something shifts above the light and you may understand something beyond your sense of sight, far from the world of man. Everything's changing now. Open up the window, feel the calm of the first cool breeze. Feel how the wind blows, you can see the forest through the trees. When you flip the switch, you may deny what you once held as true. I will be revealed, seek and you'll find that you can open up the floodlight. We got separated by time, lifting up the gate down. We got separated somehow. Let's come together now.
Let's not assume that everybody's heard of Spock's beard. Tell me about
Right.
how.
That's a safe
I mean,
assumption.
well, I know that there's a lot of people who have, and it was quite a thing. But let's tell me a little bit about how you then found first the jump to even just conceptually start to experiment back with that progressive rock genre. How did you go from where you were creatively to that? And how did those songs, how did you recognize, oh, this is what I'm doing? This is a completely different genre in the 90s, when that music is probably 20 years outside of its heyday, commercially anyway.
Yeah, well, I made the demos on those old Porta Studio cassette. But it just poured out, and then, like other highs that I would get from my creativity. Of course, there's that high that you get. And, at first I was like, oh man, this is great. But after a while, I decided it wasn't that great. It's like, I don't know, after a while the buzz wears off and you're like, I don't know, I got this stuff. So I had my brother Alan play on the demos. And he just did so much killer stuff. It was great. When we actually came down to making the record, I flew in a bunch of his guitar stuff from the Porta Studio.
Right.
Like literally, talk about cable out,
Yep.
cable in to the ADAT. Like I took the output of the Porta Studio into the ADAT and I pushed play on one and pushed play on the other, just like until I got it timed
Synced up,
out.
right? Yeah, 'cause this is before we could just slide things around in Pro Tools. We had to actually.
But anyway, Al seemed very, he's a pretty laid back guy. I would say he seemed nonplussed would be. And then he called me up a couple weeks later. He was on vacation and he called me up and was like, dude, this stuff is killer. We got to put a band together. I was like, oh, bands. He and I had been through so many bad. I could just tell you stories all day. Funny stories of like crazy LA bands and things that we were in and meetings that we had with insane managers and stuff.
Right.
But you're so hungry, you're just like the kid like, oh yeah, sure, we'll dress like Kiss,
Yeah, right. Yeah, whatever it takes.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, we've been through so much bad stuff that I was the burnout and he was the guy carrying the torch. And so we put a band together. And, again, there's lots of stories about all of that, but we put a band together, and then he was the one trying to get us a record deal. So he actually, had a little briefcase filled with cassettes, going around having meetings with people, and I was like, God, I don't know how you can do that anymore. I was just so burnt out.
Yeah.
And I was just playing cover gigs in bars to make a living. So, it was a really depressing life, lots of drinking and drugs, and I was just getting more and more depressed while Al was doing all that, and then it sadly for whatever reason it took us like 4 years to get we worked on a deal with a company for like a year, and then it didn't work out, and he wound up getting a deal with this very small guy who was like putting records literally out of his garage.
And that's the thing that's interesting, is that you kind of give up trying to be a hit, chasing where you think the market's going. Then that doesn't seem to work. But eventually it does kind of find this audience, this group of folks that probably also felt like, I love this kind of music and nobody's making this anymore. And so this sort of underground audience has been had been waiting for the handful of progressive rock because they're still listening to their Rush albums and their Yes albums and whatever, but they finally get something new. And
I think I said when we I left out the fact that Al actually funded the first record. We finally decided, let's just make it ourselves. We had people we could borrow ADATs from. That was the thing you recorded on in those days. And we made all the Spock's Beard records that I was on were on ADATs on VHS tapes. Wow. Even Snow. Yeah. I still got it in my closet, actually.
Do you have a way to transfer stuff off of ADAT
I
into
still have
Pro
an
Tools?
ADAT. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. We'll have to talk about that another day.
Yeah, I have to. Every once in a while, there seems like there's a need for it. But anyway, so we made our own record, and then it did find an audience. I think when we played LA Prog Fest in '96, I think, I said, they gave us this standing ovation that lasted like 10 minutes. It was embarrassing. You don't know what to do after a while. Right. But that's the way prog fans are. When Transatlantic just played their last show in Paris this last July, and it was the same way. When we finished the first piece, they clapped for so long. We were just like, well, we'll just wait until you guys are done. But they were just really, the people are really, really passionate about the music, which is great because that's exactly how we are.
Right.
So there's this whole kindred thing. But yeah, what a wonderful thing to find an audience. And I was 36.
We're going to step away from my conversation with Neal Morse for just a minute, but we'll be right back after this.
Hello, my name's Rob, and I'm one of the Patreon backers of the True Tunes podcast. I'm honored to invite you to join me in support of True Tunes by signing up on their email list. I know email is often annoying, but by being on the list, I get notified when new episodes drop and when new articles get posted at truetunes.com. Sometimes, John even sends out short notes and gives away records and swag and stuff. Super cool. But really, the point is that by staying directly connected, I know that they don't have to pay Facebook or anyone else in order for me to hear from them, and that's important. They don't send out too many emails either, and I'm always happy to get them. So really, it would be helpful if you'd join me over here. You can find the sign-up link on the front page at truetunes.com. Oh, and don't forget to add John's email address, jjt@truetunes.com, to your contacts so that the emails don't get caught in your spam filter. And if you have any feedback on the show or questions, you can email him and he'll get back to you. Eventually. Thanks for listening.
Hey there, I'm Mark Feldbush from Columbus, Ohio. I'm a Patreon backer of the True Tunes podcast. I've also left a rating and review of the show at Apple Podcasts. It really wasn't that hard. It didn't cost me anything. But this show means a heck of a lot to me, and I know that reviews and ratings make a big difference when it comes to how and if others discover these conversations. Would you take a few minutes, maybe even while you're listening, if you're not driving of course, to leave a rating and a review? Even if you don't listen on Apple Podcasts, the reviews posted there push out the podcast to platforms all around the world. Oh, and take some time to tell your friends about the show. Let's drive the numbers up together. Thanks.
Welcome back to the studio with Neal Morse. So, in a nutshell, if you found yourself on a train or a plane sitting next to somebody who's like, what is progressive rock? How would you describe how the genre has evolved, and what is prog rock? How would you describe it as an expert in the field?
Well, I would usually say, it doesn't have to, but it generally involves the kind of merging of a lot of different styles. Mm-hmm. It generally goes outside of normal song structure. Mm-hmm. So there's instrumental passages and then, vocal passages, but is it verse, chorus, bridge? Mm-hmm. And usually there's a lot of playing.
Virtuosity. Yeah,
there's a lot. Well, it's a little more music oriented than song oriented, but I think the songs are also, I always stress that. I do some master classes and things, and I'm like, guys, all the great progressive rock songs have great songs as well as great instrumentals. A lot of times people have great instrumentals, but they're a little light on the song part. And so with all my history as a songwriter, I think that really played well into, going into progressive rock, because we always had choruses that people could sing along to.
We all need some light now. We all need some light now. Yes, we all need some light now. We all need some light right now. Yes, we all need some light now. Turn on your light and watch the darkness away.
Early on, the boundaries were so squishy, and it was pulling in folk, that kind of fairy folk, weird folk kind of thing, with acid rock, with classical, and it could just get completely, it was very psychedelic and strange. And then you notice, I was kind of looking at how artists like Yes, they go through that for 10, 12 years, and then in the 80s, they're figuring out, okay, you know what else we could do? We can write Owner of a Lonely Heart. And then some of the guys are like, we can also go over here and do Asia, where we can combine writing hits with progressive elements. Or Kansas is probably an even better example of being able to merge great songs with great lyrics, great melodies, and those more classical musical overtures to great effect. Where sometimes the bands it was all about virtuosity and gymnastics, and if you're a fan of the gymnastics, you're in. And as I listen to your stuff, I can hear so many moments where it's like, oh yeah, this clearly has a hook, this has a point, there's a narrative flow, and it can go off into the forest and visit all the woodland creatures and then come back. But I never felt lost. Like, I never felt like it was just noodling for the sake of showing off.
Well, good. You know, I mean, essentially, when people ask me about how I write that stuff, it's always like, well, I'm just listening and trying to hear where the music wants to go. Mostly. Sometimes it's like, oh, it's good to take a turn, you know, and to do something really unexpected. Mm-hmm. Like, you're expecting that thing to repeat, but you just keep going, and then you put a cello line underneath it, you know, or things like that. You know, trying to do something unexpected is also part of the progressive thing, I think. But sometimes, you know, the prog thing can become expected.
Right.
You know, it's like, oh, now they're going into an odd time signature thing that, oh, that sounds kind of like a Jethro Tull thing, or, you know, like anything else, it can become boring.
It can be a formula.
Yeah, if it's not inspired. I mean, I always say about all styles of music, I think it's all great if it's really inspired.
Oh, Lord, my God, you were there when things were hard. Oh, Lord, my God, hear the words I say. You will not break if my ways are mine, that's my mistake. Oh, Lord, my God, come and breathe on me. And you are the tons of angels. You are the winds of time. You are the soul that feeds my freedom. You are the dream that never dies.
So Spock's beard got quite successful within that underground thing, and then relatively shortly thereafter you formed Transatlantic. There's also you've got multiple things going on. Tell me about kind of the evolution of your path and how many different creative hats you end up wearing, and why not just have one thing, or have it all just be Neal Morse?
Well, I mean, I suppose each thing had a different motivation or, you know, creative beginning. When Transatlantic started, you know, I was still in survival mode.
Oh.
You know, Spock's wasn't making enough to live off of. So I was playing, I was looking for regular gigs. I was still playing in pubs in Europe to make a living. And then I joined the Eric Burden Band. But then I was praying, and I was like, I don't want to be gone. I don't want to be on the road anymore. I was starting to have more of a relationship with God and become a Christian. And so that was one of my Jesus tests, was because it's one thing to believe in God, and then it's for me it was another leap to, you know, Jesus says, believe in God, believe also in me. And so, yeah, I tested him. I was at the Days Inn in Boston and playing organ with, and at first, and Eric was lovely to work with. Nothing bad about Eric. But it was just the road.
Yeah.
You know, my kids were little, and I just began to feel like I was damaging them. But we just bought our first house. You know, you can very easily in life come to a place where you just feel trapped. I've got to do this or we're not going to be able to pay the rent. And my God, it's horrible. I don't want to do this. Anyway, so I got down on my knees and prayed like, Jesus, if you're real, help me get off the road. And then sometimes you're the only one that's going to know that it was God. But about 10 days later, I got a fax, because this is when you were still getting faxes. It was like...
This is also becoming a tour through the technology of the last 30 years.
I got a fax from Metal Bay Records saying, we want to license the first 2 Spock Spirit records or something, and we'll pay you this much money. And it wasn't a ton of money, but we couldn't have lived off of it, especially it was band money, you know, it wasn't my money. But for me, that was a sign, because I threw it out there, and then I got this, and started my relationship with Metal Blade Records, and so I quit the band after that. Eric's band, yes. You know, that was just one of the prayers. God started answering prayers for me. My daughter was born with a large hole in her heart in 1998 as well. And after, the church praying for her, they couldn't find the hole. And so that was, whoa. That was, the funny thing about that was I was still scared of God. When my wife called me on the phone, I was playing with Eric in Germany, and I was like, "What'd they say?" They said they couldn't find the hole. Well, are they going to run more tests? I don't think so. They said that she's fine. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Well, and I was like in this panic. I think I was afraid to believe it because I knew that it was going to change everything. My identity was at stake. And the funny thing is, human beings are so funny. We want to hang on to our identities, even if it kills us.
Right, because it will. right. And especially when we're miserable.
Yeah.
Right.
I had so much.
Is clearly not working.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that were getting better, but I was still, I was still a mess, really. My wife was helping me, the family was helping, but still inside. Anyway.
When you pull on the rope and something pulls back, it's like, oh, whoa. Whoa. This isn't conceptual or distant anymore. This is feeling pretty close to you.
And what will happen to my whole life? They'd have these altar calls at church, and I'd feel the Spirit of God tugging on me, and I'd just be like, yikes, and which is funny because you'd think I'd just run up there because, I had so much stuff in me that was so negative, but somehow it just took me a while. I didn't really jump in with both feet till like 2001.
Leave it all behind you. Time to let it go. Free the chains that bind you. Let your heart go and follow the call.
So Transatlantic then came out of the seeds of that process of leaving Eric's band and starting something new?
Yeah, it was right around that time that Mike called me. And I think in our first conversation...
And Mike would be...
Mike Portnoy, excuse me. Drummer from Dream Theater.
Right.
They were, riding very high in the latter part of the 90s. And he was talking Spock's beard up in all his... People were sending me copies of interviews of where he was talking about how great Spock's beard was. So the first thing I did when we got on the phone for the first time was thank him for all the good press. And I think I mentioned something about like wanting to quit Eric's band but worried about the finances, and he said, well, I may be able to help with that. God was just orchestrating all these things at the same time. It's just amazing to me now looking back. Anyway, yeah, so we made the first Transatlantic album. The point of the call was that Mike was like, I'd like to do a project with you. So that became Transatlantic, and we recorded the first Transatlantic album. I didn't meet Mike until we met in the lobby of the studio where we made the first Transatlantic album.
Right.
This is in 1999.
99, right.
And the first record came out in 2000.
Right.
Yeah, I think we recorded it in August, but it came out at the beginning of 2000. And
how was that different, that process of making that record and the songwriting and just the creative approach? How did that differ from the Spock's Beard process?
It was hell. It really was. I remember coming back. I took my wife and kids up there, and they were in a motel near the studio in upstate New York. And I'd come back, Sherry, I don't know if I can make it. Well, Spock's pretty much played this stuff the way I wrote it. Pretty much. We played with some stuff when we got together, but, Transatlantic was slicing and dicing and moving so fast. We were moving so fast, I didn't even remember what we did. We'd come in the next morning to listen to what we did. And I didn't know what was coming next. We'd done so much stuff. And a lot of the stuff that, they were messing with was stuff from my demos on the first piece anyway. And so I just was not used to it, and it was difficult. It was like either I was going to walk away or accept it. There wasn't any way to, this was a band thing. Right. And I wanted it to, you want it to be a band thing, but
until it's a band.
Right. But still, it's like, I just felt like they were just, it was like Frankenstein. They were just hacking off the head, No, the head came later. The first, it's like, let's take off. I don't like that part. Let's take off the foot. Oh, okay, I guess I can go deal with no foot. Then they take off the arm. You're like, oh, no arm? You're going to change the verse, Then they lop off the chorus. And you're like, okay, well, I don't know what it is now. It's a monster. No, but and what a learning experience, when the smoke cleared, maybe 6 months after, and I listened to the record, and I had just had that moment it is better. It is good that jam section, that jam section and all of the above that goes on for so long. Why are we going to jam in this 1 to 4 thing for so long? Are we a jam band now? Jam bands were very big at that time, Anyway, I learned to trust, and I learned a lot.
Don't wanna fight about the money we spent, about the things that we did, about you leaving all the lights on. Don't wanna talk about the singer again and all the notes that he missed, 'cause he always sings the wrong ones. And I'm sleeping in a similar state, but for this I swore I'd wait. Love is what I'm waiting for. Love, and then I'll start a war. Love will change what you're waiting for. Love is what I'm waiting for. There'll come a time
Flying Colors is another thing that ended up happening. So how did that offshoot happen?
Well, I can quote this because Steve said it in our first band interview ever. It started because Flying Colors really started with Steve and I wanting to write together. And so I really felt the Lord. It was a God thing for sure. I mean, because I'm not somebody who's like dying to travel extra or like really looking for people to collaborate with. You know, I'm pretty happy a lot of times just doing my thing. I'm just being honest. But I really felt the Lord was like, this mutual friend of ours called up and said, if you want to write with Steve, you should go down there this week. He's got this week open. He kept saying he was going to fly up here, and Steve Morse is also a pilot and a wonderful, wonderful guy. But he kept saying he was going to fly up here, and he wasn't doing it. And I was like, oh, this got in the way. And anyway, so I flew to Tampa, rent a car at the last minute, and drove up to his place, and we started writing. And what Steve said in the first band interview in LA, which was just jaw-dropping. I love band interviews because people say things all the time that you're just like, whoa, I didn't know that. So Steve says to the guy, they asked the same question, and Steve says, well, I wanted to write with Neal because I wanted to work with someone who has a soul. And he just kept talking, like real totally straight faced. Oh my God. And I was like, oh my God, what did you just say? I always love that. Steve's got the driest sense of humor. Did
the reviewer react at all?
I don't think so, because Steve didn't react. He just and they just kept talking. And so when we got together, it's just like, did anybody else hear that?
That's great. You're like, well, Steve, I got news for you. I had my soul removed months ago.
Yeah, that was great.
So this process of doing so many different things, how has that shaped you? It seems like then you start to do either the Neal Morse projects or Neal Morse Band. Eventually you kind of get into that territory. How did you find eventually that you're ready to just kind of be an artist and assemble different musicians to play with you or play stuff yourself? And how did that journey kind of lead you to that place?
Well, I started off doing everything myself. On the original Spock's demos, I played everything, and I had Al, kind of do accoutrements, lead guitar, weird noises, solos. But I was used to doing everything. And then, the Transatlantic thing sort of blew me out of the water in a really good way. I need to make sure since I said it was hell. I mean, they all know that it was hard for me. It's still hard. Collaborating's always, it's a little bit like a marriage, I mean, it's heaven and it's hell too. When you don't agree and you got to work it out, it's hard. But I'm so grateful for Transatlantic and Flying Colors. The same. I learned so much from those guys. Casey, the painstakingly going through his lyrics. One word, porcelain. I don't know if I like porcelain. Yeah. Like, wow. I was used to, in the Spock's days, was just like, Half Moon Bay playing 45s. I don't know what it means. Sings good.
Right.
And yeah, Casey's just like every nuance of the lyric. We'll spend hours. The last time we worked, we had to do it on Zoom. But it was, just hours going. He'll usually write a set of lyrics. I'll write a set of lyrics. And then we'll kind of figure it out. And so, yeah, I've learned so much from everybody. And the guys in the Neal Morse Band are just... I'm so blessed. How did this happen? I mean, you could arguably say that I've gotten to work with, like, some of the very best musicians in the world, Yeah. I mean, it's like, guys like Phil Kagi, Kerry Livgren, Paul Gilbert. I'm sure, there's so many. So many, Steve Hackett, just amazing people. So I'm just really, really, really thankful.
And I'm not afraid anymore. Yeah, I think I finally opened up the door. No, I'm not afraid anymore. And I'm ready to reach out for something more.
More with Neal Morse after this.
Hello, I'm Matt from Philadelphia, and I'm a Patreon backer of True Tunes. This show is really important to me. John's conversations are not only fun and interesting, they have invited me to discover and rediscover music that makes the world a better place. Every episode invites me to become a better listener, not just to music, but to the people who create it. As a result, I think I might be becoming a better listener to the people in my life as well. I know that my $5, $10, or $20 per month goes a long way toward helping with the costs associated with producing and distributing a show of this caliber. And yes, the rewards are cool too. We get early access to new episodes that we can download in a higher quality audio format, as well as invites to exclusive backers-only Zoom hangs and some special swag and stuff. Check out patreon.com/truetunes for more information or to join me and the rest of the Patreon tribe. Thanks.
Hey, this is Ray, and I'm a Patreon backer of the True Tunes podcast. I have really enjoyed following and listening to the True Tunes Gallery Stage mixtape that John curates every week on Spotify. Kind of reminds me of walking into the old True Tunes and John being so excited about some new music he heard. Each week, usually midweek, he updates the mix with around 40 new songs, sometimes new releases, sometimes deep tracks, and I try to listen to it every week. I have discovered tons of new music and been reminded of things I loved from the past. Sometimes he ties songs into current events or seasons, and I've even noticed that by listening regularly, I often get a subliminal heads up on artists before they show up on the podcast. You can find the mix on the front page at truetunes.com or on the show notes page for this episode. You can play it from the player on the site, or if you follow it, it will always update automatically for you and hang out right there in your Spotify browser. And as always, as great as Spotify and other streaming services are for music discovery, please remember to support the artists you love once you discover them. Thanks.
We're back with Neal Morse.
As the man fell on down to his knees, as the pack on his back hit the floor, it rolled down the hill and would never be seen anymore. Leave all your burdens here, cry away every tear. I'll take your pain and all your sorrow. Son, you've been gone too long. This is your freedom song. Sing and the grace of God will follow.
Tell me about your awareness of this world of actual quote-unquote Christian rock music. Did you think about that from a marketing perspective, or did you worry or ever notice any difference in how your fans reacted to that?
Well, all the way through, it was led by the Spirit of God. You know, I mean, my motivation all the way along, I quit Spock's and Transatlantic because I felt like I should. I mean, it was a moment of prayer. Like, I just felt like the Lord was like, "It's time," and you know. Like, okay, I did know. So I quit, and then I didn't know what I was going to be doing. I, was ready to do anything. Be a barista or. Thank God, I don't make very good coffee, so I'm glad that didn't happen. But then I started to just hear. I think it was about 3 months after I quit the bands, I started to just hear all this progressive rock music playing in my mind. It was so much, I couldn't contain it. You talk about the exceeding abundance of God, because I thought that God would use me in the Christian realm. I thought that God was gonna, I was just waiting and praying. And I thought that he would make me a music. I thought he'd probably use me in music some way, because that was my skill set. So, but I didn't know how. I was like, Lord, are you going to open a door that I'll be a music minister in a church downtown in Nashville? Or you want me to make, because I can write pop songs. I've written, I've made some worship albums. I can write worship music, and I think some of it's pretty good. And so he could have opened a door there, but he didn't. And so I just started to write the Testimony album. I didn't want to do the same thing that I was doing and put a Christian stamp on it. I didn't want to, not change and say I was changed.
Okay.
Does that make any sense?
Sure. Yeah.
So I was very cautious about it, and I just started writing it. I thought, well, it can't hurt to write it. And in those days, I carried around a handheld cassette recorder, and I was trying to help a friend move, and I was trying to help him move, and I started hearing this music. I'm hearing this whole like kind of classical piece in my mind that I was just loving. The cello line, and I was like, I put the couch down and I said, because I had forgotten my recorder and I was worried I was going to lose it.
Right.
So I was like, I'm sorry guys, I gotta go. So they still joke with me, like, don't ask Neal to help you move.
Because he might get a song.
He might hear a cello
when he's carrying a couch.
Yeah. But it was just amazing, the outpouring. And so that became the Testimony album. And then, I was surprised. I didn't know, it was new. It was a new door I was walking through. I don't know what the best analogy is, but yeah, I didn't know if anybody would go, if we were going to lose the house. Is everything just going to come crashing down, and we're going to have to figure out what else to do. But I mean, that is the life of faith. That's the true life of faith. Is Jesus is always like outside of the boat, saying, "Come on, get out and walk with me out where it's risky." And that's where it was for my wife and I. And I thought it was just great that like about half the audience came. Mm-hmm. I think we lost about half at that time. But it's morphed and changed since then,
Right.
That was 2003 or something.
And that might have just been a function of awareness too.
Well, some people do not want to hear about Jesus. There was about half of the audience, maybe less. I don't know, as far as percentages go. But there were certain people that were like, I can't listen to this anymore. And there's still people like that. Like, I love progressive rock music, and I like a lot of his music, but I can't listen to anything that talks about Jesus. And that's fair enough, really. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't think before I knew him and everything changed in my life, I don't think I would have been too keen on listening to music that had stuff about Jesus in it. I made this concept album right before I left Spock's Beard. It's called Snow. We didn't want to do it. We were all against a concept album, but it just wanted to be a concept album.
Because it seems like one of those prog things. Like,
yeah, it seems so cliche.
Check the box. We got a concept record. Where's the pointy hats?
Well, right. Wear the cape.
Yeah, we'll put the cape and the pointy hat on.
And then Testimony comes in. It's a concept album. And then somebody comes to my house and makes this suggestion about one. Did God create many things, or did he create one thing? Ooh. I don't know, it just sparked this whole thing, which became the one album. And then came the Sola Scriptura, the question mark albums, all these concept albums. And I think one thing that's great about concept albums as a Christian is you can tell a story, which is totally different than worship music. Worship music is we're going to praise God together. Let's praise God together, and that's great. I love worship music. But if you're going to tell a story, then you can pass through all these spaces. I can tell, like on Testimony, Jesus doesn't show up till like the last 20 minutes of the album, I think, or something, because I'm telling my story. On one, it's like the God and man are together, and then man goes off by himself. I'm going to create things myself. I can, I'm going to get the glory for myself and build skyscrapers, and then he finds how empty that is and crashes down. And the thing that's great about all that, and then of course Jesus comes to save him. That's kind of the story arc of that album. But what's great about that is you can write a lot of stuff that people who aren't Christians can relate to.
Right, and that's what I was thinking is the genre itself, I think, lends itself to that kind of approach and exploration. And it also seems to me that there's a mythological penchant in prog music, and there's a mythological element to a lot of scriptural stories. Like Lewis just says, this is just the myth that happens to be true. So Lewis and Tolkien can tell these stories that imbue these values and contain these gospel elements, and the whole world can enjoy Lord of the Rings or Narnia. And my wife and I did quite a few trips to Central Europe, working in places like Czech Republic. And one time we were doing English work, and we'd play concerts at night and work with teenagers during the day, using lyrics as a way to kind of talk about English, but great. Also talk about meaning, And we're breaking down a Coldplay lyric or U2 lyric to talk about the difference between literary understanding of English and metaphorical, like meaning. And at one point, we're using some scripture verses that the song lyric was referencing. And I asked the teenagers, I said, does it bother you at all? Like, is it uncomfortable for you for us to refer to our faith or to the scriptures in this way? And they said, oh, no. We find it very interesting. It's no different than if you were talking about Zeus or Jupiter. They're not at all threatened by stories about Jesus and especially because it was all done in a format that made sense. We were looking at text to try to find meaning, right? And I thought, man, I grew up in this culture in America where Christians are constantly, in my world, we're trying to kind of shove the gospel, into like a trick, like we're going to shove the vitamin into the peanut butter to get it down the dog's throat, kind of a thing. I was like, progressive rock always had these kind of weird mystical stories, and why wouldn't it make sense for somebody to be exploring gospel ideas, spiritual metaphors, even Jesus in that milieu?
This world is not our home. You can live like a rolling stone, but you cannot escape with your life. We seek a city on fire with the heart of a child's desire. We will cross that bridge and enter into
But then eventually you've been able to re-engage with some of those things you'd quit. Like you're able to go back and work with some. So at what point were you able to decide, I can do all of this stuff. I can do my specifically biblically themed records and collaborate with Transatlantic, and all of this stuff is back on the table.
Yeah, well, that was later on. I think it was around 2008, 2009. Interestingly, a lot of these albums and ideas, they came from someone else. Someone else said to me, "You ought to make a concept album about Martin Luther and start right in the middle of the battle and all this stuff." It's like, oh, okay, you're nuts. I'm never going to do that. And a couple weeks later, it's just haunting me. That's what's next. That's what's next. Wow. But the Whirlwind album was actually a friend of mine saying, he's a real Bible guy, and he was thinking about the whirlwind in the book of Ezekiel, and how God speaks to Job out of the whirlwind, and that the four winds all the four guys in Transatlantic could be like the four winds. You should write an album called The Whirlwind and have Transatlantic record it, which was really out there to say in 2008. You know, because I hadn't done anything or even talked to them since 2002, I think. Anyway, it was another one of those things, a little worm in my ear. And so I, you know, that was the beginning. It always starts with some kind of piece of music for me. It's like, well, I'm feeling this music, and I think those guys would be great on this. So, and conversations that you have, you know. But I did proceed with caution about a lot of that stuff. Again, I don't want to go back to who I was. I don't want to be even perceived as going back. So I was very careful about it. And I had lunch with Rick Altizer around that time. I was kind of feeling this thing about Transatlantic and the Whirlwind. He was like, he just put my mind at rest about it in a really godly way that, you know, that might be hard for some people to understand why that would be a challenge for me. You know, I also didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. You know, I didn't want to hurt the Spock's guys' feelings. I just had all these considerations about it. But that was the beginning of me coming back and working with Transatlantic again. And then we had a couple different Spock's reunions. And we wound up doing the whole Snow album, which had never been performed at Morsefest in 2017, I think, something like that. So, yeah, I don't know. It all, you know, comes back around. I'm just really thankful that the Lord's led me into such beautiful places to play music with such great people.
Well, and it seems very consistent with how I've experienced things, that maybe there's a time to come away from things to grow and heal and learn, but often, you know, the experiences that we've had equip us to go love a particular group of people and be a part of a community. And so we're often sent back, and you know, Patrick was sent back to Ireland to the people that imprisoned him. Like he had a unique ability to go speak that language and use their metaphors and stuff.
Kind of felt like it was like the Lord saying, no, I'm not going to take you out of that. I want you to testify to the people in that.
Right. And you bring your whole self wherever you go, as opposed to splintering.
I'm like, thank you, Lord, because you know, I love this music and I love the people, and you know, it was like He let me have it all.
This community has coalesced around this music. You've got Morsefest, so people actually physically can come and hear all the different expressions of music. Tell me about your thinking and how that evolved as to how you would curate this community and cultivate it more intentionally over the years, and where those ideas came from and how that's been manifest.
Well, you can probably guess that what I'm going to say. God did it. I didn't do it. God did it. He totally did.
Was it that same voice saying, "Call me God," like booming in your chest, or was
no?
it...
It's always different, right?
A little bit more subtle, probably.
Yeah, the way he works is always different, interesting. What happened for Morsefest was my pastor at the church here. This is 2013 or something. He's like, you travel all over the world doing these concerts. Why don't you do one here? And I'm like, huh. I think to myself, this guy has no idea what. Yeah, I love my friend Steve Farmer, but I did, it's like we don't have a big audience here. We'd have to fly in, we'd have to bring in sound and lights. It's not really possible. So I just kind of blew it off. And my wife and I were going for a walk on the Greenway one day, and I asked her. I just mentioned, Brother Steve thinks we should do a prog concert in the church, because he's a cutting edge kind of guy, wants to reach people, and she was like, yeah, that's not going to work. But if you were going to do it, you need to make it like a special weekend because you don't have a lot of fans here, but probably people would come in, you know, if we had like a whole thing. And I start thinking about the Marillion weekends. You know, they do these weekends that are just tremendously successful, and you know. And then she says, "Are there any albums that you haven't performed in their entirety?" And I said, "Well, that's weird. Mike was just saying how he's never played one all the way through. We didn't tour that." And I was, you know, that's one of my favorite albums that I've ever made. So it was like, for me, I know that the Lord has to dangle music before me.
It takes a pastor, a wife, a Greenway, and an album you never performed, and all of a sudden, the impossible starts to seem like something.
And she says, and, you know, couldn't you get, like, the string players that played on the record? Because they're all local. Like, you can't take all these people on the road.
Right.
But you could get them to show up in Cross Plains. I'm like, yeah. So you could probably get a choir. I'm like, yeah. So that was how it started. And then, but as far as what it became, because it's become something way more than that. You know, part music festival, part spiritual retreat, part homecoming fellowship. It's become a community thing that's got its own life, which is just amazing. I mean, it's like, and you know what I said in the beginning? I said, okay, I'll do it, because then we started talking about it with other people. And my thing was like, I'll do it, but I'll only do the music. If somebody else can do all the other stuff, then I'm down. And that's the way it's been. Pretty much I just do the music, and other people do all the other stuff. And it's just great. It's like, it's just God, just the orchestration.
Tell me about the app. You're able to actually coalesce all this mountain of music. I mean, I tried to count it in 40-some albums, studio albums, 40-some live albums. I don't know. It's a ridiculous amount of music.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff, yeah.
You've developed your own ecosystem that people can subscribe to. Tell me about the thinking there and how you executed that.
It started with me really enjoying streaming myself. You know, not having to get up out of the recliner to, you know, your phone's the remote.
Right.
You know, somebody wants to talk to you, you just pause it, and then, you know, it's so great, and the sound quality seems really good. You know, I A/B'd it with, so I wanted to provide that for my audience, and actually, make some money from it, and so I started talking to people about that, you know, and looking for a team of technicians that would help me with it, and then I threw it out there on the internet, and you know, there were some wonderful people that came in and helped me create this app called Waterfall, and it has all my stuff and more. You know, like you can put any demos or piano improvisations or solos on there, and then people have the app on their phone and they can just use it like Spotify. It's great.
Is that something that your new projects and everything will kind of come out through that platform? Is that your exclusive platform, or is it just one thing among many, or how does that fit into your...
Well, the label, I have to say, it's very kind of the labels for the newer things to allow me. They allow me to put it on Waterfall.
Or you still have relationships with other labels?
Yes.
In addition to your own label, which you
Yes, I do.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of the most recent records I've been putting out have been coming out through Inside Out music, which I kind of parted with around 2012, I think, and then kind of went back doing things with them in 2018, and it's been really good. But they're very nice to, because when you sign these contracts, it has the digital rights in there, but they just say, that they don't mind me having it on Waterfall, so everything is on there. It's great.
Set all your dreams to go. Wake up wondering where you are in time. I find no better place to go. Somewhere wandering there I see the one. And I here by the waterfall, sweep my troubles all downstream. There at the riverside, every tear I've cried washed clean.
How do you maintain this level of output? I mean, you show up every morning here at the studio and you've got something else. You're just constantly writing and recording, and it's not the kind of music you just phone in. This is fully produced, organic, complicated, high level, high concept kind of stuff. Where do you draw from to get the resources creatively to keep creating at this level?
Well, I think every good and perfect gift comes from the Lord, of course. I just, it's my lifeblood, God's very kind, always giving me something that I'm inspired to work on. If I don't have anything I'm inspired to work on, I'll create something. Pretty much.
Right.
Even when I'm on vacation, I actually sometimes feel like I write more on vacation than I do when I'm home.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just love creating things, and it's literally what wakes me up in the morning. I might sleep all day if God didn't wake me up with new ideas. So I'm really thankful.
Are you a reader? Is it film? Is there other things that spark and kind of put gas in the tank creatively that you then can draw from for references?
Wow, I don't know, all kinds of things. Thought here, a word there. Yeah, sure. It all shows up. That's what's scary about what you put in. It'll come out.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So be careful what you put in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really inspired by biblical things still. I'm working on some new pieces that are based on biblical stories and things like that, and just it's amazing that there's still more you can dig out of that stuff, no matter how many times you've heard this story or that story. It's like, wow. That's what's so great about preachers. Sometimes they'll just bring something out. I never thought about that before. Wow. I've heard that story a million times. Yeah. So hopefully my music will bring out things that people hadn't thought about too, and spark something in them.
Thanks, Neal. There was so much more we could have talked about. We could have gone down the creative process rabbit trail. I will say that Neal is so generous with that information on his own podcast, on his YouTube channel, and in other ways that I didn't feel like we had to drill down into every little detail. As you become a fan, however, know that there is a lot to discover in Morse land. As I pull out my soapbox to wrap this up, I'm wondering about the critical and even cultural pushback prog rock has experienced for so long. What might be behind that, and what it might suggest about how some of us approach music or art in general. I'm also thinking about how Neal had to get to the end of what he thought success looked like before he found his true path. I know that a good bit of the critique progressive rock faced back in the 70s and 80s was that it had become bloated, maybe even indulgent. The punk ethic steamrolled the rock world with the democratizing idea that anyone should be able to do this stuff. Rock and roll shouldn't require extensive expertise, special training, or even much in the way of critical thinking. Just let it fly. 3 chords and the truth. It was populist. It was participatory. It was tribal and fun and disruptive, and some empowering in beautiful ways. And obviously, the reaction wasn't just about the music. The punk revolution was as much about the repudiation of academia, the political establishment, industry, religious institutions, and all the other complex systems of power that had worked hard to keep order in society without providing real answers or lasting justice. It was as if an entire generation was sick of having the answer to every question they had about why they were locked into cycles of poverty or unfairness with some variation of, "It's complicated." No, they said, it's not complicated. Complicated answers were how hucksters tricked us. We'd had it. Enough was enough. Time to strip it all down to the studs. There's some truth to all that, and I count myself squarely among those who wanted those simple answers, those brash, basic songs I could scream along to. But I think we may have lost something important as we jettisoned anything complex in favor of the simple, and maybe cultivating a taste for more complex music might help stimulate our tolerance for difficult ideas, our ability to discern, to tolerate paradoxes, or even to enhance our capacity to learn, to remember, to imagine. It is absolutely clear that music has a profoundly positive effect on the learning capacity of the brain. It helps children learn. It helps older people retain brain function longer. The science is clear and well documented and completely fascinating to me. Music stimulates the brain in powerful ways. Learning to play an instrument will almost certainly improve a student's performance in school, from math and science to language arts. Listening carefully to music can be deeply therapeutic for everyone, from toddlers to the seniorest of citizens. Oh, I'm all for big, simple anthems, and I love a good folk song. But might some of the disdain toward progressive rock be based on the fact that more complex ideas take more time to absorb? Complicated songs, played by virtuosos, might require something of the listener that simple songs do not. But what if there is a reward waiting for us in that complexity? What if there is a treasure waiting for us up on that misty mountain? We might be missing out on something from which we would really benefit if we chose to engage it thoughtfully, to put in the work. Nearly half a century on from the punk revolution, I see some parallels to other cultural reformations. There's some real beauty to be found there. But is it time for the pendulum to swing back a bit? It's frustrating to see how fast revolutions turn into new institutions. Did that punk spasm against complexity, as needed as it may have been, like the simplicity of the Jesus movement or any number of populist political revolutions, become so cold, so fast, that they became the new system against which thinkers must now rebel? Today, it seems, we need to be able to think complicated, three-dimensional thoughts. We need to be more self-aware and self-critical than ever before. Maybe carefully crafted, complicated, brilliant art, like Neal's or jazz or classical music, or a brilliant painter, writer, poet, or sculptor, might help stimulate our brains to think more deeply, more compassionately, more critically. Neal didn't find his success until he got to the end of the simple answers. I don't know. I guess I'm ready for some more complexity alongside my folk art and my old punk records. If music can stimulate my brain, spark my imagination, enhance my critical thinking, then bring on the good stuff. Okay, I'm climbing off my soapbox now. That's going to do it for this episode of the True Tunes Podcast. Thanks so much to Neal Morse for his time and for allowing us to use so much great music. And thanks to Mark Hollingsworth for setting all this up. You can learn a lot more about Neal's music, Morsefest, Radiant Records, the Waterfall app, and more at nealmorse.com. You'll find links and a list of all the songs used on this episode on the show notes page at truetunes.com/Morse. Thanks, as always, to our Patreon backers, especially the newest members of the tribe, Brent, Jim, Peter, and Lori. If you'd like to join the group, head over to patreon.com/truetunes, or if you'd like to give us a one-time gift, you can find the PayPal link on the show notes page. And thank you for doing all the things, leaving us the ratings and reviews at Apple Podcasts, subscribing to the weekly Spotify Gallery Stage mixtape, and signing up for the email list. This podcast was written and produced by me, JJT, with co-production, editing, and sound design by Bruce A. Brown for Gyroscope Productions. As always, thanks to Phil Keggy and Rex Paul for our theme song, the special instrumental mix of Full Circle. The contents of the program are protected by U.S. copyright law and are the intellectual property of Gyroscope Productions, with the exception of songs or clips that are from previously copywritten materials. Everything on this episode is used by permission or under fair use provisions. Thoughts and opinions of our guests do not represent the positions of the producers or our sponsors. Discernment is recommended. This program is intended for the private use of our listening audience. Gyroscope Productions can be reached at jjt@truetunes.com or P.O. Box 60401, Nashville, Tennessee 37206. Until next time, this is JJT, and yes, you can take a turn with the cape now. Just be careful with it. Rock on. Peace.